the objective, if you look at the board, is to really be able to define this big fancy word called cell differentiation, or it could also be referred to as cell specialization. And we're going to try and figure out what organisms can go through this process and what organisms cannot. So if we just look at this word differentiate for a second, what word do we see in differentiate? So it looks like a big fancy word, but we can recognize a word in there. What do you see, Cassie? Different. Good. Okay, if we look at the word specialization, what word do we see in there? Rob? Special. So it has something to do with being different, special, and it has something to do with cells. So we're talking about cells that are different or special. So we're going to watch a quick brain pop video right now, and that's going to help partly introduce it, but then we're going to look at a little article too that will help us try and figure out what does this word mean. All right? So, Jay, since you're right there, do you want to hit the lights? Thank you. Where'd it go? There it is.
Dear Tim and Moby, how are cells different? From Stephen. Well, for starters, there are two basic types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells don't have any membrane around their nuclear material. They're single-celled organisms that can live on their own. Well, thanks a lot. Eukaryotic cells are what we're made of. They have a nucleus of hereditary material that's surrounded by a membrane that controls the life of the cell. Plant and animal cells are both eukaryotic. Cells come in all different shapes and sizes. The size and shape of a cell can sometimes tell you something about its job. One nerve cell in your leg can be a meter long. Those little fingers on each end, called dendrites, let signals jump from one nerve synapse to the next. This here red blood cell is about 1/10 the size of a period on your computer screen. It's a tiny, flexible disc that can move through even the narrowest blood vessels. A plant xylem cell is long and hollow with holes so it can transport water and minerals through the plant. Plant and animal cells are pretty similar inside, but there are two major differences. Plant cells can make their own food, and animal cells can't. Plant cells' green color comes from green organelles called chloroplasts. Chloroplasts trap light energy and enable plants to conduct photosynthesis. Animal cells are surrounded with a flexible cell membrane. Plant cells have a membrane too, but outside of that, they protect themselves with a stiff outer wall. Both plant cells and animal cells work in teams. When you take a tiny piece of a plant, there are tons of cells clustered together in that piece, working together. Same goes for a piece of an animal. I'm not saying that. Oh, fine. Cells team up and work together, just like Moby and me.
Alright, so, based on that video alone, if we look on the back easel, could we pick from each group, which group do you guys think has to do with differentiated cells? Look on the back easel. So is it the top group, or is it the bottom group? How many are thinking it's the top group? How many think it's the bottom group? Okay, so this reading might help clarify a bit, because yes, they talked about plant and animal cells in the video, but when we're looking at this a little bit more closely, let's see if we can make some more sense of it. So let me just refer to the easel really quick before we go onto there. All right, so if we look on the back, we've got sperm cell, egg cell, brain cell, heart cell, skin cell, and blood cell. And in a separate group, we have animal and plant cells. So most of you picked the animal and plant cell group as being the differentiated cells. So just to clarify for a second, when we were talking about all the organisms that exist in the different kingdoms, right? We have the animal group, we have the plant group. What other groups do we have? Chris? Yeah. So there is such thing as a bacteria cell. Okay. What other groups are there? Charles? The protist cells, right? And we're missing one. Courtney? Good. The fungi cells. Okay, so all of these organisms, we know, are made up of at least one cell or many cells, right? So who could pick out the ones that are multicellular on this list? Which are the ones that are made up of more than one cell? Jay, what's one of them?
Animal cell.
Okay, so the animal cell is one. What's another one on here that's multicellular? Patricia? A plant cell. And Charles? Protist, some could be. We haven't learned any in here, but there are some, like kelp is a protist that's also multicellular. But the ones we've been learning about so far, amoeba, paramecium, those are unicellular. So just because that's our reference point, we'll keep them unicellular for now. Fungi is the other one, okay? So these are the multicellular ones, okay? So what they were trying to explain to you in the video is that each of these has their own separate characteristics. And within an animal or a plant or a fungus, there are going to be things called specialized cells. And those specialized cells, examples of them could be a blood cell, a skin cell, a heart cell. So some of these other examples that you gave. What do you think those would belong to? An animal, a plant, or a fungus? Blood cell, skin cell, heart cell. What organism are we talking about with those specialized cells? Claire? How many agree with Claire that those would belong to an animal cell? Okay, good. So these are all specialized or differentiated for animals specifically, okay? Plants, however, have their own specialized cells, and we're going to look at some examples today. Fungus also has some of their own specialized cells. Can bacteria and protists have special cells with different tasks? How many think yes? How many think no? So for those of you who said no, why not? Why can't bacteria and protists have their own special cells? Rob? They only have one cell. So there's no way to divvy up the work to all these different cells with different tasks because they're only made up of one. All right, so we're going to read this little article now to try and solidify that idea before we take some notes today. Okay. All right, so after reading that and watching the Brain Pop videos, anybody think they can define now what cell differentiation is or cell specialization? So use those words that you pulled out before to help define it. So different, special, cells. What are we talking about here? Charles, you want to try it?
Differentiate means like there's variation of different cells.
Okay.
Specialization means like that each different cell has a certain job, which creates the organism doing what it does.
How many agree with Charles? Okay, awesome. Well said. So we're going to add it to our vocab list on the board here so that we continue to use this term in class. So cell differentiation, just as Charles told us, it's different cells with special jobs. Okay? So they each have their own special job. So can someone give me an example of a specialized cell? We read about it. You guys mentioned some in your Do Now. It was in the Brain Pop video. What would be an example of a cell that has a very specific task to do? Quincy? Plant cell is kind of a generic overview, right, of, yes, it is a type of cell, but when we're talking about a very specific cell with a specific task, you would have to give me a specific type of plant cell. Do you see what I mean? Within its body. So you want to try again?
Blood
A blood cell. So that would be within an animal, right? A very specialized task. So we're going to see now today how a blood cell has a very specific job versus a nerve cell versus a skin cell, and how they all work together to get the organism to function as a whole. Okay? So if they didn't have all of these pieces, it'd be very difficult for the organism to survive. So we're going to take a couple notes today. So let's take a look at the note guide that's in front of you. It says cell differentiation. And anywhere there are words that are underlined on the slides, you're going to be filling in on the note guide. Okay, so a couple of these things are review in the beginning from things that we've learned in earlier lessons, but the rest of them you're going to really hopefully understand this idea of cell differentiation. Do you guys have these? Does everybody have the note guide? Okay. All right, so let's look at the top. It says unicellular organisms are made up of only one cell. Okay, we know that already. And unicellular organisms dominate life on Earth. What does that mean when we say dominate life on Earth? Anyone know what dominate means? Go ahead.
Like it's most of the population?
Yeah, so although when we look around we see mostly just multicellular organisms, if we had microscopic vision we'd be able to see a whole bunch of these little guys around, but we can't because they're tiny. We need a microscope for them. But there's a whole lot of them, a lot more than the multicellular organisms that exist. So we also know multicellular organisms are made up of many cells. Okay? And there's a lot of variety among our multicellular organisms. So if we look at those pictures, we've got a picture of a plant, fish, a mushroom, right? Those are all multicellular organisms. But they're very, very different from one another. And the reason why they're different is what? What were we just reading about? They're different because they have what kind of cells? Yeah, go ahead. Specialized, yes, those special cells. It was allowing them to be very different from one another so that they can exist successfully in whatever environment they're living in. So the differences among living things has everything to do with the ways in which cells are specialized or differentiated. We could use those words interchangeably. Specialized, differentiated, they're talking about the same thing when they're referring to cells. So all of these cells are specialized to perform a certain task. So here are some samples of cells that you came up with in the Do Now. Some of you mentioned red blood cells. You can see that flat disc-like shape they have that helps transport oxygen. They're also very flexible so that they can fit through your tiny little vessels. So your veins, your arteries, right? I used the example in the other class with if you've done the mile during gym, what starts to happen to your breathing while you're doing the mile? What happens to you, Jay?
It starts to get heavier and more faster.
Okay, so yeah, you've got a lot more heavy breathing. And what's happening to your heart rate as you're doing that mile? Courtney? Yeah, it's increasing. So why do you think that is? What does your body need more of at that moment? Reese? More oxygen. And guess whose job it is to transport that oxygen? Patricia? Which cell? The blood cell, the red blood cell in particular. Okay, so there's its special job. Right, so a muscle cell, those are a group of 3 up there, they also have very special jobs. They're thin, flexible, okay? Then we have an example of guard cells on a leaf. These are specialized to say, yes, you can come into the plant, or no, you can't come into the plant. So if you've ever looked at a leaf really closely, has anyone ever noticed it has tiny little holes on top of it? Okay? Just like if you were to look at your skin right now, you also have tiny, tiny little holes all over. So those are little pores, and those pores can allow certain things in or block certain things out. So those guard cells help do that. Okay, so our nerve cells, we watched those in the brain, in the brain pop video, okay? Anybody remember why they have all these like finger-like extensions coming off of them? What does that allow them to do? Chris?
Like one is spread of nerves in the group.
Yeah, so these nerve ends can all kind of touch into each other so that they can send a very quick what? Sense, or yeah, sort of a message that's being sent. Think about when you touch a hot stove. What's your immediate reaction? Ow. Right. cell. You're going to pull away your hand pretty quickly, right? So if it wasn't for your nerve cells having all these little nerve endings, they would not be able to send that message as quickly as you need it to be. And then you'd be stuck there with a burnt hand, right? So having these specialized cells gets that message sent to your brain really fast. All right, so at this point, we have just been learning about cell division, right? And when we learned about cell division, there's the parent cell, it goes through this whole process, and at the end, we end up with two daughter cells that are what? Identical. Yes. So that should leave your head scratching like, wait a minute, how can we possibly have all these different cells if through cell division we're ending up with identical cell after identical cell? So something else has to happen after cell division. Okay, so cell division alone cannot explain the development of new structures. If the cell's only divided, the result would be a big ball of identical cells. So could we exist as a big ball of nerve cells? No. Sometimes I feel like I'm a big ball of nerve cells, but no. So you have to have these other cells working together to help you out. So what process is needed? The next step after cell division. Who wants to say the big new fancy word of the day? It is, go for it, Rob. Good job. Cell differentiation or cell specialization. So that's what's next after division. Can I flip it?
No.
Yes.
All right, well, you could look on with someone if you just have another word to write in. All right, so instead, cells differentiate. So differentiation is cells throughout an organism can develop in different ways to perform different tasks. See that, Charles? You were right on the money with your definition. Okay, so as these cells differentiate, they become different from one another. So there's that word different again. How are you doing on this one? Can we switch it?
Yes.
So, who wants to take a guess of how this is happening? Who do you think is getting the cells to differentiate? Who's going to say, hey, you're going to be a blood cell now, you're going to be a nerve cell, you're going to be this cell? Who's saying that? Who gives instructions inside our cells? What have we learned in earlier lessons? Go ahead, Reese. The nucleus. And why? Because the nucleus inside has what? The nucleus is encasing, say it if you know it.
DNA.
The DNA, right. So during this development process, as these cells have divided, each cell is going to become fixed or set in how it will differentiate. So that plan determines which type of cell it's going to become. It's all coded in that DNA, right, which you know is in the cell's nucleus. So it's kind of like the DNA is telling them, okay, this part is turned off. You don't have to worry about this, this, and this. You only have to worry about this part, right? So the active DNA is what's guiding the cell on how to develop. So if it's a blood cell, for example, all they have to worry about is transporting that oxygen around the body, right? So all the other stuff is turned off. They don't have to worry about it because as we learned in cell division, every single cell has all the same DNA there, so it's all there, but some of it is turned on to do a special job where the others don't have to worry about it. Okay, so the way that I describe this is, how many of you would be thrilled if I said, hey, this Friday, you've got a project due, and it's going to have a Spanish oral exam, it's going to have 20 math problems, it's going to have a 3-page language arts essay, a science experiment, and a social studies project. How many would be happy? It's due Friday. All by yourself, got to get it done. Okay? How many of you would say, if I said, well, you know what, actually, you're going to work in a team of 6 people, and you're going to get to pick a person that's fluent in Spanish to be part of your group. You're going to get to pick somebody that loves math, someone that's totally into science, someone that is great at language arts. All right, so we're much happier the second time around, right? So it's kind of the same thing. If we're talking about cell differentiation, we've got a whole bunch of cells, all with a very specific job, and they're good at that job, and they all work together so that the whole organism can function and survive, right? So it makes for a much more successful organism when they've got all these pieces working together. Can I flip this one?
Yes.
All right, so plants, animals, and pretty much every multicellular organism. So we mentioned how there's some fungus that are multicellular, there's some protists that are multicellular, right? So they all begin their lives as one cell. We know that, right? Because either through sexual reproduction, a sperm and egg are joining up, and that's the starting one cell, or even through asexual reproduction, if a piece is budding off and it's going to be created, it's still starting as one cell, and then through mitosis, creating the rest of its cells. But now we've got this other piece to it. So not only does mitosis happen, where we have all these cells dividing, but now that mass of cells has to start to differentiate. So that single cell is going to become an organism with all sorts of specialized structures. So then that's when we get things like a nerve cell, a muscle cell, a red blood cell, etc. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you some pictures of these things up close so you can get an idea of what their special jobs are. And you'll notice that their structure has a lot to do with what their function is. So we kind of already talked about the red blood cell a little bit and how the shape of it helps do the job. And the same thing goes for these others up there. All right, so animal cells are specialized in many ways. So we have, here's some example of animal cells. There's the red blood cells transporting that oxygen. So they've got that nice big disc shape, so nice and flat so they can easily take in oxygen from your lungs and pass it off to the rest of your body, okay, through your capillaries or veins, that kind of stuff. Okay, cells in the pancreas producing proteins. Anybody know what the pancreas helps regulate? I'll give you a hint. People that are diabetic have a tough time regulating this because their pancreas isn't functioning the way it should be. What is? Not digesting. It's part of it, but it's regulating the amount of blood sugar. Okay? Muscle cells allowing for movement, so there's a lot of flexibility here. Okay? We talked a little bit about the plant cells, so I'll show you this a little bit more up close. All right, so here's these guard cells we were talking about. So first, here's the pores, right? Here's an open one, here's a closed one, okay? And here's the guard cells around it. So you can see the guard cells here are closed, not allowing the pore to be open, so certain things can't get in the plant. But over here, we can see the guard cells are open, and when they're opened up, that's allowing things to come into the plant, like water, carbon dioxide, all sorts of stuff, right? So those things are allowed in when the guard cells are open and not allowed in when the guard cells are closed. So again, it's just another example of how cells can be specialized for a very specific function. Okay? All right, so what do you guys think the 4 levels of organization are? This is in what Mrs. Snow was just reading to you. So 4 levels of organization. What are all organisms going to start out as? They're all going to start as, Quincy? One cell. So we have individual cells that we're starting with. So this is the last little part of your notes there. And who can remember from the reading? So these individual cells now are going to join together to form... Achoo! That was your hint.
Sneezes. Nose.
Raise your hand if you think you know.
Oh, bacteria.
Go ahead, Jay.
Bacteria?
Sneeze.
Individual cells are going to come together to form bacteria. What are we talking about here, right? Because we're not talking about bacteria today because bacteria are only made up of one cell, right? So these cells, plural, are going to come together and make up what, Courtney? Tissues, right. Now you get my hint. All right, tissues. Okay, so now tissues are coming together to form what? So we've got different tissues now joined together to make up, Brandon? Organs. Good job. Then we have different organs that can come together to make up an entire... Patricia? Forgot? Go ahead. Go ahead, Charles.
Organism.
Not yet. We're almost there. We're almost there. Right? Organ systems. Yes. And then once we get all those organ systems together, then that makes up the whole what, Charles? Organism. Good. Okay. So let's see how we do with a little quiz on these things. So first of all, I forgot about this little picture. This will help you see it a little bit. Okay, so here's the muscle cell. Here's the muscle tissue. So it's a bunch of those muscle cells together. Notice how they're all very similar and alike. Then different tissues. So some muscle tissue with some nerve tissue, some blood tissue. All that's going to come together to form the organ. So in this case, we're talking about a stomach. And the stomach is just one piece of a whole. Anyone know what system the stomach belongs to? Make your health teachers proud. Say it if you know it. Digestive. Good. All right, that digestive system, which includes the esophagus, small intestine, large intestine. Let's see how we do. So cell specialization is a characteristic of A, bacteria, B, all unicellular organisms, C, yeast, or D, multicellular organisms. How many think A? B? C, D. Good job. Awesome. Multicellular organisms. All right, which of the following cells is specialized for contraction? So meaning contracting, expanding. So A, muscle cell, B, red blood cell, C, pancreatic cell, D, nerve cell. How many think A? B, C, D. Good job again. Yes, the muscle cell. All right, the stomach is an example of A, tissue, B, organ, C, organ system, or D, organism. How many think A? B. Good. All right, awesome. And which of the following shows the levels of organization in an organism from the simplest to the most complex? So take a second to read them. How do you think A? B? C? Good job. All right, last one. Which of the following would probably contain the greatest variety of specialized cells? A, an organ system, B, a tissue, C, an organ, or D, a multicellular organism? A, B, C, D. Nice. You guys are the first class that all got that right. All right. Very nice. All right, agenda's out for your homework tonight. So what you need to do for homework is you're going to be completing the Google form below that goes with your period. So you're not going to look at period 1, 2, 3, or 6. You're going to look at period 7. You're going to click on this link, and the form is going to pop up on the screen. What you're going to do is just follow the directions. You state your first and last name. In your own words, define cell differentiation. What type of organisms have the ability to differentiate cells? Would this be considered an advantage or a disadvantage to an organism? And explain why you picked advantage or disadvantage if you're unsure or right unsure. Really important that you hit submit when you're done, because I'm using this tomorrow to put you in a specific group. So please make sure that you're completing this to the best of your ability tonight.